So you're buying your first house and you're trying to figure out how to negotiate the inspection. So in this video, we're going to go over what the basics are of the inspection negotiation and what the inspection contingency means timeline-wise and what it means for you as the buyer. And then we'll go over all of my tips and strategies for the best negotiating strategies. Hey everybody, it's Brad Decater with the Decater Real Estate Group. This video we're going to go over the inspection strategies that I have for the negotiation process. So the first thing is, what is the inspection contingency? What does it mean? So when you write a contract to buy a house, if you're going to have a inspection contingency in there, meaning that you are allowed to inspect the property and find out all the defects for it with a certified inspector, and then you have the opportunity to either leave the contract or negotiate some repairs or some money back for that inspection. So your offer and the contract is contingent, meaning it's required for you to get the inspection, and you have the option to then leave that contract so you are protected with the inspection contingency in place. So we'll get right into the timelines. Here's how it usually goes down. You would get the contract signed, and then you typically have somewhere around a week. We actually decide when we write the offer what the inspection contingency timeline is, but let's just say it's 1 week or 10 days, whatever it is, that's the amount of time that you have to get the inspection and make your response from the inspection. So my first tip for once you actually are getting the inspection is get a great inspector. Hopefully the agent that you're working with has great connections and a good network of inspectors, but getting the right inspector is super important. Obviously we want them to know what they're doing. We want them to have a broad knowledge, kind of a generalist knowledge of all the aspects of the house, electrical, plumbing, roof, all the main systems and structures, different building codes, sewer scopes in some cases, rodent activity, the list goes on, but they need to be a generalist. The reason that they're a generalist is because their goal and their job is to identify all the issues that could be wrong with that house, even if they don't specialize in that specific item. So if they find that there's some roof issues going on, they are allowed to say, hey, I see some roof issues, here's the pictures and here's the description. However, I recommend that you get further inspections from a roof contractor. So the first tip is just to make sure you have a good inspector. They have a nice clean report so that it's easy to tell what the problems are, because you're going to use that report in some cases to do your negotiating. So get a great inspector. Second tip is to be aware of what you might expect. So a good agent will do this for you. When you guys are seeing a house, let's say it's a 1940s built, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be on the inspection report, and it's important for you as the buyer to expect or to know what to expect so that you're not blindsided when you get the inspection report. The inspection report might be 40 pages long, and it might be super scary for you unless you kind of know what to expect. So for each era of home, there's always specific things that you're always looking out for, and those are the things you might want to expect to see in the report so that you're not blindsided from that. The next tip I have for you is to make sure that you are present at the inspection. So by law here in Washington State, you don't have to be there for the inspection. The agent's required to be there, and then the inspector, of course, will be there. So the agent can, represent you and kind of go through it themselves, but I highly, highly recommend, I always tell all of my clients, make sure to be present at the inspection. The reason for this is that when you get back to your house and you get the inspection report back on the paper, it can be 35, 40 pages long, 60 pages in some cases, and it can be overwhelming. And you want to make sure, and it can look more scary on paper than it actually is in person. The great thing about having a great inspector is that they don't just tell you what's wrong with it when they're there in person. They usually explain some common causes for that situation and some common repairs, and sometimes a little bit of maybe what it might cost. A good agent will also let you know what those things might cost. But being there in person, you get to walk through, ask questions to the inspector, and really get all their knowledge in person so you can hear what they're saying, as opposed to just seeing the red writing on the inspection report, roof has a leak. At the inspection, if you're there, you can understand where the leak's coming from, what caused the leak, and maybe you think that it needs a new roof after you read the inspection report, but if you were there, you might have known that, hey, this actually just needs like 2 shingles replaced, or a little underlayment deal, or they have a nail pop, so something really small. In person once they explain it to you, but the inspection report might make it look a little bit worse because their job is to make it not look so good because we use this for negotiating. So being there in person is another great tip. Okay, so once we get the inspection back to us in paper, it's our job then to review that with our clients. So make sure to review that with your agent. You're gonna go over all your general concerns, your big concerns, everything about the inspection report, and just kind of chat it out and talk about it. At that point, you're going to have some decisions to make. What happens once you get the report and for your response, you have 4 options. Number 1 is you can just move forward and sign off, we're good. I would highly recommend against this option because in real estate, when you have the inspection contingency in place, you are protected, but the seller they can't leave the contract. So by you asking for something, it's really, you can't get hurt in asking for something. So I always tell my clients, I'm always gonna ask for something. It's just good practice for negotiating. I mean, if you ask for $10,000, even though there's only a repair for $1,000, the worst that they can do is say no. Now, I always wanna make sure my response is reasonable, which I'll get to in my next point. But you definitely wanna always ask for something because you can. The second thing is that you can start asking for repairs or closing costs or seller concessions. So that's the second option. And the third option is going to be you can actually walk away from the contract. So maybe you're just completely scared away. There's a huge foundation issue, the roof or the house is falling over, whatever it may be. You have the right to just leave the contract, get your earnest money back to you, and just move forward, start looking at other houses. That's another option as well. And then the last option is to get additional inspections. So earlier in the video, I talked about how the inspector is a generalist. So if they find an issue that they want an expert contractor or they recommend that, you actually have the ability as a check mark in the response form to get more inspections, and you actually get another timeline for that, typically 3 days, although it can be negotiated. So you would extend your contingency period to get, let's say, the roofer out there. So now you're gonna get the actual professional in that specific field, let's say it's the roof, so they're gonna assess the roof situation and then also give you quotes. So it's important if there's something that's going on that it maybe is a bigger issue that you guys think could cost a lot of money, you do wanna use that clause and get a second inspection out there so that you can find out what's really going on here from a specialist, and also most importantly, what does it cost? That is gonna have a huge impact on how you negotiate. If it's a $2,000 repair versus a $15,000 new roof, you need to know that. So getting the second inspection could be a good idea depending on what's on the first inspection. So those are our options. Once we make our inspection response, here's my best tips for how to actually negotiate it. Because up until this point, we're just gathering information and kind of figuring out what to do. Now we're getting towards the deadline. We need to make our response, and this is when the negotiation actually starts. Like we start talking to the other agent and making the negotiation work. So my number 1 tip for the negotiation process is to negotiate in cash. Cash is king, right? So the reason we want to negotiate in cash is a variety of reasons, but the first and most important reason is that we don't want the seller working on the house that he or she is leaving. Could you guys guess why maybe? They're leaving the house, right? They're typically going to be doing cheap labor as possible. They might be half-assing the project. They might not even do some of it, maybe just cover it up. Maybe there's some dry rot behind some drywall. They might just put a new drywall piece on there. And yes, you have a second inspection, you can re-inspect it and stuff, but you just don't want a seller to be working on the house that they're leaving. They're just not very incentivized to do a very good job. They may do it themselves, they may not get a licensed contractor. So just in general, if you can help it, it's always gonna be better to negotiate in cash because you don't want them working on the property. The other reason that cash is a great way to negotiate is because typically you're gonna get more out of it. So think about the situation of the seller. They're in escrow right now. We're probably closing in 2 to 3 weeks from when this negotiation is happening. So it's coming up pretty quick. I don't know about you, but in our area, finding a contractor pretty quickly and getting them to actually do the work, pretty difficult. So asking them to do all these repairs is a huge burden on them. They're not gonna wanna do it because it takes time out of their day. They have to get 3 bids, schedule it, check up on the work, make sure they do a good job, all that stuff. So it's a big burden for them. So they're almost always willing to give you more cash than they would actually do the repairs. Let's just say it was like a $1,000 roof repair, like the plumbing boot came out, it needs a new boot on there, something pretty cheap, and it was $1,000. They would rather give you $1,500 for it just to save them the time and effort of actually hiring and getting the work done. Unless they're a contractor themselves, they might want to do the route of doing it themselves, but again, you don't want them doing it themselves. So you typically get more money in cash. They're more willing to give you cash than they are to actually accept the repair work. And then it's in everyone's best interest to negotiate in cash. So that's the reason that I like to negotiate in cash. It typically works out best for all parties involved, especially the buyer side, because you're usually going to get more out of the seller that way. there's two ways you can negotiate in cash. You can negotiate for a seller concession, and this truly is like cash to you. Let's say that you had $10,000 of closing costs that are going to happen at the end of the deal here. If you negotiated a $5,000 seller credit, they actually would be paying directly towards your cash to close. So if you had like a $50,000 down payment that needed to be done and a $10,000 closing cost, your cash to close is going to be $60,000 on closing day. So if the seller gives you a $5,000 credit, then you actually only owe $55,000. So it truly is like cash in your pocket. You're not spending as much cash to get the house, so therefore they're paying you the $5,000 cash. It's just happening through escrow, but essentially you are keeping more money for yourself. So if you want to get the repairs done yourself, you can actually use that money because you'll have more liquid funds to get the repairs done. And as I've said before, if at all possible, you want to use your own contractors, do it on your own time, make sure it's done correctly. So if you can get money for it with a seller concession, that is going to be our number one option. We want to get cash back if at all possible. In some cases, they may not be willing to do that, or you already have your closing costs paid for. So the thing about the seller concessions is that you can't get more than your actual closing costs and prepaids. So let's just call it $10,000. So if there's a $20,000 repair, let's say it's a new roof, you couldn't get a $20,000 seller credit because that's going to go over the amount that they're allowed to give in a credit. Just because they're not allowed to actually give you cash. It's illegal to get cash after closing, so it has to be done through escrow, and you can only get up to the amount of your closing costs and prepaids, typically around $10,000. You could get a little bit more. Let's say it was 15 grand. You could actually buy down some points for the lender. So there's ways to do it, but in that case of those big repair items that are going to be more than your closing costs and prepaids, you're going to want to ask for a price reduction instead, which to the seller is the exact same thing. If they give you a 10K credit or they give you a 10K price reduction, in the end when they get their money, their net proceeds, it's going to be the exact same amount. But for you, it's a big difference because if you get the seller credit, you're getting $10,000 more in your pocket at the end of the day. Whereas if you get a $10,000 price reduction and you're getting a loan, that's not the case. You're only getting $10,000 off the purchase price, which is all wrapped up into this big loan. So you may only save, $25 a month for the 30 years. It adds up to $10,000, but it's just wrapped into the loan. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's always better to get a seller concession than it is to get a price reduction if at all possible. So how do I actually negotiate it? Now that we've decided that we want to move forward in cash, I want to go ahead and put my strategy together for my buyer. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over the inspection report. I'm going to itemize all the items on the list that are big. I'm not going to mess with little ones because if we get nitpicky, it's just kind of a strategy thing. It's going to maybe turn off the seller. So we want to ask for as much as we possibly can, but with also being reasonable. We need it to make sense. If there's $5,000 of repairs and we ask for $50,000, it's not going to work out very well. They're probably more likely to say no to everything than to give us $3,000 or $4,000 because they're offended and it doesn't make sense. We're asking for things that don't matter. So for that reason, I don't like to get nitpicky on the items when I'm itemizing. So if there's one outlet that's not GFCI protected or something like that, I probably would leave that out. I want to leave it. I want the negotiation to make sense for them and make it all the big items. So what I do is I itemize the list and add up what it's going to cost. Okay, $2,000 for the roof repair, $1,500 for the plumbing, the sink leak that needs to get replumbed, whatever they are, right? The list can go on and on, so I can't name them all for you, but I itemize the list. And this goes back to before, if you were going to get a second inspection, you could actually have real quotes for that. So these are legitimate numbers. In most cases, I don't do that unless I don't know what it costs. Being in real estate and having contractors and doing this stuff a lot, I know the ballpark of what things cost. If we need a specialist out there, then I absolutely do. I do suggest it. It's a great idea. But in a lot of cases, I know what it costs to replace the outlet. So there's small items. I know what it's going to cost, and we're going to itemize that out. And then I'm going to add 10 or 15%. And then that's what I'm going to ask for on paper. So once I actually send the 35R, the response form to the seller, that's when the negotiation really starts. So remember, we're itemizing the list and adding them all up and then asking for just a little bit more, a reasonable amount. And then in that email and my phone call, we're going to go ahead and make our case. So another tip for you to tell your agent, or if you're an agent watching this, don't just send the response form in an email and leave it at that. Don't just say, hey, here's our response, let us know what you think. I like to explain where we're coming from. I'm a win-win negotiator. So I like to understand where they're coming from and make sure that they actually understand where we are coming from. So another tip is to make sure to have a phone call and talk to them about the issues. You don't want to send the inspection report. In our state, that's illegal unless they ask for it. So just make sure to talk to the seller, the listing agent, and let them know what's going on and what your concerns are. And another tip for your agent, or if you're an agent, is to stay strong in the beginning, right? So I always prep my buyers. If we're asking for $10,000, I'm letting them know that my goal is to get somewhere in the middle, because the law of negotiation is just typically that's how it's gonna work out. That's why we wanna ask for as much as we can while still being reasonable, but with the understanding that we're probably gonna land somewhere in the middle, and that's a win because we're getting something back, right? Assuming that they're okay with moving forward on the property at that price. So the negotiating strategy and tactic here is that you have time to let them know that you have some wiggle room, but you do not want to do that up front. So when I send the form and I make my phone call, I tell them, hey, the good news, we still want to move forward. Like, they almost wanted to back out. There's a lot of issues going on. We do have some major concerns, but the good news is we want the house still, but we really got to get this stuff figured out. And then I let them know what we're asking for, and I say, hey, here's the deal, man. I could have asked for a lot more than this. My buyers actually wanted me to ask for more, but I told them we don't want to offend you. We want to be reasonable. So we're really honestly asking for our low ball right now, like our bottom of the negotiating here. So I'm sending you this and just letting you know that we are strong at this number. So we really hope that you guys will sign it and let us move forward. We definitely want the house, but we don't have a lot of leverage or a lot of leeway on this offer. Okay. So just talk to your seller and let's do the best we can to work together on this and make sure that we can, move forward. I know that we both want to get this deal done, and the buyer and the seller also do, but we just are firm on this price, okay? So that's kind of how my initial phone call goes. They're gonna then talk to them, and at that point, by the way, I'm not gonna ever call him again, he or she again, until they respond to me, because it's in their court. If they don't respond to me, then they automatically agree to our terms, right? So I'm not gonna remind them that the due date's coming up or like get antsy, like, oh man, we asked for too much. I should probably call them and say, hey, oh no, we're actually okay with only $5,000. So just like, could you guys sign that? That's gonna show some weakness. So I'm gonna make my initial phone call and I'm gonna stay strong, and then I'm gonna not talk to them again until they call me. And they will call me. They're gonna call and they're gonna probably try and get a verbal that'll let me come down. At some point, I will probably let them know that we have a little bit of wiggle room because it's a win-win negotiation, and I want them to know that we're on the same team working together to get this deal done. And if we give a little bit, they're more likely to give as well. And that helps us usually land closer to our side, and I typically win these negotiations all the time. So those are my best tips for the negotiating, the inspection contingency. Hopefully that helps you guys out. If you have any questions, definitely put them down in the comments. I can do a more elaborate video. You can also check out this video here, which is about what the inspectors look for in the actual inspection. That'll be a good video with Eric, my main inspector. If you guys enjoyed the content, I'm gonna make a lot more educational videos like this, so please subscribe if you don't wanna miss any of the tips and tricks that I have for you, and like the video and share it. Thank you.